Hello there, welcome back to Terminal, and I hope today's going well. I'm Grand Admiral, and today we've got the first installment of our Weapons Around the Galaxy playlist and series, and we're going to start this off with the elegant weapon from a civilized time, the lightsaber. So what exactly was a lightsaber in itself? So the lightsaber was actually a blade, a plasma blade, being channeled through an emitter, and inside that emitter we did have the emitter matrix, we also had emitter circuits, and that would allow it to flow through. We also have the energy gate, which would open and close depending on if the switch, or the activation switch was on and off. We also have the energy core, which held the kyber crystal, and we have the power cells, which the lightsaber would divert power from to, allow everything to work properly, and it did have to have an approximately sized power cell to fit in the hilt. Now, lightsabers themselves were very, very powerful, but they could actually be taken down to a much lesser power for training purposes, so for the younglings, and those would not be lethal, but they could still inflict burns. Now, lightsabers as well, just to note, they could actually work in any environment. They could work underwater, as we see Kit Fisto use on Mon Cala. They could also use in space, as we see Plo Koon, he uses them in space during the Malevolence attack. And we also see them used, obviously, in different environments on different planets. So they could work anywhere. Lightsabers also were constructed of many different materials. Most commonly, they were made of metals, and they were made of different types of metals. If you wanted, a lightsaber-resistant hilt, well, all of them had to be very strong metals, but you could have Beskar hilts, because, I don't know, you might want a Beskar hilt. They also could have, different types. You could also there were wooden lightsabers. You did have wooden lightsabers, and that used a special kind of wood to be able to contain all the power of the lightsaber. And most famously, Gunji, the Wookiee Jedi, actually did have a wooden hilt. Now, lightsabers themselves could not cut through anything. They were incredibly powerful, and they could cut through most things, but they couldn't cut through everything. They couldn't cut through Beskar, as we know. They also couldn't cut through Frink. They couldn't cut through a Zillabeast hide. They also could not cut through other lightsabers, or they couldn't cut through electro staffs, which were used by Magna Guards commonly, and also I believe Hondo and Aka actually had an electro staff. They also couldn't cut through Z6 or B6 right batons, and they also couldn't cut through Cortosis. Now, lightsabers also could block Sith lightning, and they also could block, energy blasts from blasters. Now, lightsabers themselves could come in very different colours, obviously depending on the kyber crystal, and those colours did have different meanings. I probably will get around to making a video on what actually the different colours mean, but red and white lightsabers weren't actually natural. So to get a red lightsaber, you'd have to bleed out the crystal by pretty much, using so much dark side of the Force to pretty much bleed the crystal to red, and then you could also heal the crystal to make it turn back to white, and that would, make it a white lightsaber. The Darksaber itself was an exception. I have no idea exactly how you get a Darksaber coloration. Not many people really know, and I don't think it is known to us yet. But I'm pretty sure it's just a black lightsaber crystal, or a crystal that has been made with a black coloration from Tar Vizsla. Now, the lightsabers also, as well, they could be used in both offensive and defensive purposes, being able to block many different things, and also being able to, have different lightsaber forms. Now, another thing about lightsabers is there are many different types, actually, and these types were very different in their own ways. So, for instance, we had the Lightsaber Cane, which, for instance, was a lightsaber held in a cane, so that's one type of modification. And we also have things like a hybrid lightsaber, which is another type of modified lightsaber which would hold a blaster in it, like Ezra Bridger with his Stun Blaster. You also have things like, double-bladed lightsabers, Shoto lightsabers, light daggers as well, which were very, very small blades. They're very used by assassins. We also have things like light whips, and I'll make a whole separate video on those horrible things. We also got things like, snap lightsabers, where you would be able to, have a double-bladed lightsaber, and you'd be able to, make two lightsabers and then put them back together to make a double-bladed lightsaber like a Sarge Ventress. You also have things like a curved-bladed lightsaber, so, kind of Dooku and his curved hilt. You also have others like a folded lightsaber, as I like to call them, or a flip lightsaber, and those were things that Jedi Temple guards actually like to use, and they were, able to, have a lightsaber in half and then flip it back to have a double blade. It's a smaller lightsaber, but still very nice. You also have the Darksaber, as you can see, and that has its own, special kind of hilt design. And you have all these, different lightsabers, and those are just to name a few. You also got Force Pikes, which get very much mixed up. No, sorry, not Force Pikes, Lightsaber Pikes. And they get commonly mixed up with double-bladed lightsabers. Lightsaber Pikes are kind of like, imagine it like a long kind of pike-like thing, and then on the end of it, a yellow-bladed lightsaber kind of up at the end. And you also have the broad saber, which was more traditionally it was more designed after a traditional sword. like a katana. Imagine it like that. Now, another thing to note about these lightsabers, well, all lightsabers were, aside from the fact that they were incredibly powerful and able to block many, many things, they could also be used in, other ceremonial ways, depending on how they wanted to be used. They also didn't technically have to be even used at all. They were, not the easiest things to find, and they were commonly known by many as only Jedi weapons, with the Sith coming later into the game of being able to use lightsabers. And before lightsabers were actually used, we had Proto-Sabers, so a lightsaber, but it had an external power source. These things weren't as powerful, and I am actually going to make a whole separate video on all the Proto-Sabers and everything. And you also have things like Force kind of swords, I think they were called. Lightsaber, I think they were just called Force swords. And they were coloured kind of metal blades that were, enhanced by the Force, but these weren't lightsabers yet. But those were even earlier than Proto-Sabers. And lightsabers, as we know, adapted through time. They were, made to be, more impressive, stronger, pretty much everything over time. And their even external design changed. We had different types of designs. As we know from Galaxy's Edge, we have, protection and defense. We have peace and justice, I think one of them's called. We also have, power and strength. And we also have, is it called nature? And I have no idea what the other one is. But they each have different designs. And all of them, each design has their own kind of history to it and why it's kind of designed in that way. But most of the time, it's really just to mark out kind of what order they are. And another thing to note is, I think, as I said earlier, is if you were, not a Jedi or a non-Force user, you could still use a lightsaber. There's nothing saying that you couldn't. It was more just your connection to the blade, and the blade wouldn't actually be as powerful because you're not connected to the Kyber crystal. When you're connected to the Kyber crystal through the Force, it's going to be a purer blade, as I would like to say, or something that's a lot more powerful in its own sense because you've got that Force connection. If you don't, then it's still going to be a lightsaber. It's just not going to be as powerful. Now, one last thing I want to note about lightsabers is kind of this very, very, very important thing that I think I really should know. If you put the, emitter matrix inverted, so if you invert the emitter matrix, then you have a giant problem. And that will cause the actual flow of the blade and the flow of the lightsaber to actually flow backwards. And it will, at best, it will short circuit. However, if that happens over long periods of time, or at worst, and it could happen immediately, it will blow itself up. So it will go from short-circuiting, and there'll be no blade formed, to kapow, have an explosion. And actually, that explosion could kill people. So it was a very, very, very powerful explosion. We do actually see this in the Clone Wars, when one of the Padawans from the Gathering, the annoying one, the overconfident one, he builds his lightsaber, inverts the matrix, doesn't work, and the actual droid, he says, don't do this because, very dangerous, you could kill yourself. And, he ignites his lightsaber against the pirates because he pretends to give the Kyber crystal to the droid, and then ignites it, obviously it fails, gives it to one of the pirates, and then it goes boom. So, again, these are very dangerous, which is always the thing whenever you have a real lightsaber like these, you'd always kind of be thinking, is the external, is the emitter inverted, is the emitter matrix, is it inverted or not? Because if it's inverted, you're screwed. So I think that's just one final thing I do want to mention before I go into a quick recap of this video. So overall, what was the lightsaber again? The lightsaber was really just a plasma blade being channeled through an emitter. The emitter matrix you'd also have in there, and you'd have the energy gate, and those were incredibly necessary. You'd also have the activation switch, which would determine whether the energy gate was open or closed. You also have a power cell at a reasonable size that could be held in the hilt, which would, everything from the lightsaber would have to divert power from that power cell to be able to work well. You'd also have, at its heart, the Kyber crystal, which really would actually make the blade itself, and you'd have the blade channeled from that Kyber crystal and the Force energy around it. And then would have a focusing ring to make sure that the blade goes out towards the emitter, and also you'd have the activation switch, which would open or close the energy gate. So these could be turned off and on at will. They could also be, lightsabers could also deflect blaster bolts and Sith lightning. They also could deflect other lightsabers and electro staffs. They couldn't cut through everything. For example, Beskar, Frink, Cortosis, especially Cortosis fiber, very, very good. And they also couldn't cut through things such as other, energy kind of style weapons. Because in a sense, they were just energy. As I said, lightsabers, they can come in many different metals, and most of the time they were your standard kind of styles of metal that we can normally see. But they could also come in wood, so by that I mean they could come in many different forms and appearances. There are also many different types, for example, Shoto, double-bladed, and, you could have two lightsabers, that's not type of lightsaber, but you could have, I don't know, for another example of this, we'll just say, I don't know, a curved hilt lightsaber. But overall, lightsabers were incredibly powerful, they were brilliant weapons, they could cut through nearly anything, and they were absolutely brilliant. But I hope this taught you, a lot more about lightsabers. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed making it. It took me quite a few times to really get this right, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time with the Electro Staff video, which I think will be released hopefully today, if we've got everything ready for it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and may the Force be with you.